Hey, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. So there's a question. Has the three principles made NLP irrelevant? Is Richard Bandler outdated? These are interesting questions to ponder because in recent years, there are quite a few people who have left the field of NLP or neuro-linguistic programming and fully entered what you could call the three principles community. And some of these are quite experienced. And just the other day, I came across a video made by a friend of mine called Amir Karkuti, who has an NLP background and has made uh, the jump or the switch over to the three principles over time. And he made a video titled Three Ps or NLP. And he also made a video called Three Principles versus Tony Robbins, Who Wins? And I thought they were good videos. I largely agree with him. I have some disagreements too, and some complementary perspectives. So I thought I would share them. So Amir has a great story, a great analogy in that video where he talks about a Richard Bandler seminar that he watched, where this business guy is up on stage and he complains about being depressed. And I haven't seen this, so I'm just taking this from Amir's description. But where Richard Bandler says to him that something to the effect of, if you had a really ugly, picture on the wall behind you, that you really didn't like, what would you do? And the guide said something to the extent of, I'd just remove it. I'd just take it down. And allegedly Richard said, well, that's it. It's that simple. And that's what NLP does. You repattern something, or you reframe something, or you change the structure of an experience so that your experience is different. And Amir said that this was one of the kind of aha moments for him, where he kind of realized, like, dude, what if you just told him, hey, it's a fucking picture, or had him realize that it's a picture. Like, if you truly saw that it's just a picture, you don't really need to restructure anything or change anything or manage anything or solve anything or anything like that. So Amir's point is, why, like if it doesn't really exist in the first place, it's a thought, then the idea that you have to add all these other tools or thoughts to reframe, move around, get some markers in there to kind of change the face or change the smile or something like that. Like it's just strengthening an illusion in a sense. And I think that was a really good analogy, and I think he's right. Because if people don't quite see that a picture or a photo is essentially a photo, they might come in time and time again and say, well, what about this photo? Or, what about that photo? Or what about that picture, right? And as long as you don't quite see that, it looks as if you have to change or manage all these things, contrasted with really seeing that it's a photo. You could use the analogy of a movie, and a movie screen. If you don't quite get film, and let's say that the hero in the movie, gets shot. Let's say that you get film, and you have a friend who's taken a time machine, who's sitting next to you, who doesn't get film, right? And let's say that the hero in the movie has been shot and is on the sidewalk. You're both likely to feel something, but for your friend, it's going to look like a problem to be solved. Maybe you have to rush and do CPR, or barricade yourself, or chase the gunman, or protect your friend. Versus if you really see that it's a movie, like if you really understand film, you don't have to do anything. There's nothing to change, there's nothing to solve. There's just a seeing that the experience is illusory. So if you see a client, you can work with them at the behavioral level. You can work with them to change the content of their thinking. You can work with them to change the structure of their thinking, like they often do in NLP. But you can also help them essentially discover the nature of thought itself. And that is a higher level thing that will give you more bang for the buck. So, and I've had similar experiences like Amir. I remember many, many years ago, when I used to do more traditional NLP based work, I had a guy come in who, for fear of public speaking, who had also seen another NLP guy who had done some good work with him. And this guy had an image in his mind of an audience kind of staring at him with big eyes, and that image had terrified him. And the NLP guy had helped him to change the image into a big smile and open eyes, and that felt really different. And his request of me was, but what do I do if the old image comes back? And I had this like epiphany moment of just kind of trying the image on and realizing like it's an image. Like why would you have to do anything? So there really is something to that. And as a result of that, I think that once you get a good grasp on the nature of thought, indeed, a lot of the techniques and the tools and the orientations in neurolinguistic programming might very well look obsolete. Now, here's a counterpoint, right? Because the three principles world will then say, well, you don't have to do anything. You don't really need any techniques. However, if you look at how a lot of people have these insights, very often they're through either reading books or going to a talk, listening to a video, where someone uses different analogies and metaphors and stories to kind of point to this. And if you're lucky, you get a glimpse. Now, the thing is that if you as an instructor set up a seminar or a coaching practice where someone comes in and they pay money and they put you in a position of authority and knowing something, and that teacher is telling stories and analogies and metaphors and with the intent to help you to see something, to say that that's not a technique and to automatically label that if someone guides you through a thought experiment with your eyes closed or eyes open as a technique, that's a kind of artificial distinction in my mind. Meaning, what people might be doing internally in terms of listening and intuiting and making connections while listening to these stories versus what they might be doing internally as part of a thought experiment or an eyes closed process might be virtually identical. So to then label one of them a technique and the other one as a non-technique, it doesn't quite sit well with me. And there is an art to telling good stories and having compelling delivery and using suggestions and these sorts of things and knowing how to set up a good learning context for people. There is a lot of stuff to that. Now, what's changed for me over the years is that I do various thought experiments with people. I do behavioral interventions. I do breathing stuff. I engage people in paradoxical activities. I do all sorts of stuff, but it's usually with the intent of helping people get a glimpse into how their experience is illusory. With the right framing, the tools of NLP and hypnosis and stuff like that can be extremely useful in terms of doing that, because the reality is there's a lot of people in the three principles world who have been to seminars, read books, paid good money to see coaches and all sorts of stuff, and they haven't really glimpsed much, and they're still suffering a lot. You know, you can just go to any three principles forum and you'll see this, right? So the reality is not everyone is going to be reached. Not everyone is going to have an insight or have a glimpse by doing that. For some people, you will reach them a hell of a lot better by doing other things. And here is where, if you can combine an insight into the nature of thought, how thought is illusory, with an insight into neurolinguistic programming, into hypnosis, into various schools of psychotherapy, if you can learn a little bit about memory and suggestion and stuff like that, you'll potentially have a way of reaching more people. So let me give you a couple of examples from my own practice. One of them is from the year 2001. So this is 20 years ago. I had a client in my office for fear of heights, and he worked as a telephone technician, and we had these like telephone poles right outside of my old office. So I told him to bring his climbing shoes. Now, regarding this particular profession, it would be very difficult for him to continue in that profession with that fear. Now, in the office, I did what I could to help him realize that it wasn't really the heights per se, it was the story, the representation inside of him around heights that freaked him out. And I was not able to reach him. Like he couldn't hear any of it. He couldn't access any of it in the office. But I had to deal with him that he was going to do whatever I told him to do, as long as it was not unethical and not fattening. I had a hunch that he might be a little bit difficult. So I told him to get his fucking climbing shoes on. And he did, right? And now he started to feel some of the fear. We walked towards the pole, and I asked him, while he was still standing on the ground, on a scale from 0 to 10, where are you on the scale? He was like, 4 or 5. And then he climbed, and it was horrible for him. And when he was like at the top, he was like at a 9.5. So I asked him, where are you now? He's like, 9.5. I said, good, you can come down now. And there was an immediate relief. And having climbed maybe like 1 meter, I asked him again, I said, where are you now? And he said, well, almost nothing, because I know I'm going down. Right? So he came all the way down, and as he landed on the ground, I grabbed him. I looked at him intently to build an expectation. I said to him, dude, you were a 4 to 5 standing on the ground. You were a 9.5 up there. You were like at an almost nothing way up there. How on earth could it be the heights? And he got it. He got it. Like, he really got it. He had this embodied experience of realizing what his experience actually was. And that did it for him. Now, you might say that, well, this was universal consciousness or wisdom moving through me. Well, yeah, But I think it has a lot to do with me spending a lot of time studying people like Milton Erickson and Jay Haley and various schools of symptom prescriptions and ordeal therapy, and knowing a little bit about how to orchestrate a context. Now, am I saying that that guy could not have changed in a different context? No. But what I am saying is that if you know some of that type of stuff, you're going to be able to reach people who you wouldn't be able to reach in the other way. Just a couple of years ago, with way more experience, both with NLP and three principles, understanding, and all sorts of stuff, I had a client who was phobic around germs and people having the flu. Just the idea that someone around her could have the flu would drive her into this fear state, and the notion that someone could puke and that she could puke was just terrorizing her. And this was a client who I had a couple of sessions with her in the office, connecting with her. We had good rapport, using analogies, telling her stories, all sorts of stuff. She kind of intellectually got something, but it didn't really make a difference, right? So then at the third session, I turned on my computer and I had her watch videos of people puking. And that really activated something inside of her. And then I had her take a tennis ball like this, and I had her throw it across the midline to really activate both hemispheres in a very rhythmic way. So I had her do this for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds, and the whole thing collapsed. Like the whole shebang just dissolved. And we did that a couple of times more, and that was it. Like it literally took seconds, right? And this was me knowing something, having some competence, having studied a lot of different modalities, and knowing to do something else. I don't think it would have occurred to me to do that hadn't I had the background and the training and the reading that I had, right? So this is an example of, now of course after that it was easier for her to see that, oh my God, this was just this thought construct to begin with. But it was a lot easier to reach her in that particular way. So I still think that neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy, meditation, all these things, the work of Milton Erickson, these things are just as relevant. It's just that if you can help people see the nature of thought, it gives you a lot more bang for the buck. So I think Amir is definitely onto something, but I don't think, well, I don't think it's the full story, to put it that way. Now, another advantage that the three principled world has is that it has a tendency to orient people towards that which is present before thought, and that which still remains after any thought. And this is useful because it helps people to kind of unhook that constant identification with thoughts and feelings, which makes it seem as if we are, these stories about who we are. And a lot of three principles people have had some insight into seeing that, look, other people are not who you think you are, and the world is not what you think it is, and you are not fundamentally who you think you are. There's something deeper than that speaks to our nature. And pointers in that direction, also in a change work context, is very, very valuable. It's kind of like an early meditative insight. Like if you look at various maps for meditation practices, this particular insight of kind of realizing that you're not your thoughts and your feelings, um, that's an extremely useful pointer uh, in practice with people. Now, the three principles don't really go any further than that, but people can go further than that. Now, the three principles world, though, it has a tendency to turn this into another story of, being divine consciousness and that our nature fundamentally is love, peace, and happiness, and these sorts of kind of idealistic stories and belief systems that often gets believed in with a religious zeal of sorts. Um, this, I think, is something of a drawback in the three principles community. Now, Amir mentioned something else, which is, compassion over conceptualization, love coming first. And there's a lot to be said for that and to really caring about people. And if you fundamentally have the recognition that we fundamentally share the same being, that's easier to do. It's easier to fundamentally operate that way. Although, having said that, there's a lot of very loving, compassionate people who are not very effective in terms of helping a particular client change. And there's also people who don't have a lot of that. I think Richard Bandler seems to qualify, who often are quite effective in helping people change. So we need to contextualize this a little bit. Like, for example, let's say you have someone who can't spell. Well, there's a good chance that a good NLPer could help you with that by using a different strategy. In that particular context, and you don't have to choose. This is a false choice, but I'd rather have an asshole who could teach me that, who was devoid of any compassion, versus a very compassionate person who just didn't know how to teach that skill, right? Of course, this is a false choice. I'd rather have a compassionate person who could teach me those skills. Something else that you see in the NLP world, you see people being successful in helping people with mind-body stuff, such as allergies and chronic pain and on occasion even remissions from stuff like cancer and autoimmune diseases and stuff like that. You virtually never ever hear about that type of stuff in the three principles world. So that's also a reason to, helping someone see the illusory nature of thought is fantastic, and you can continue to deepen your insight around that, for as long as you live. But it won't necessarily improve your ability to relate well to your kids or to make better decisions. It won't necessarily do that, So sometimes learning particular psychological skills, whether it's critical thinking skills or particular communication skills, can be very useful. Final point that Amir made, where he talked about a particular clip with Tony Robbins, and I watched this one myself. This was the day after 9/11, where Tony was in Hawaii with over 2,000 people. And first he thought about canceling the whole thing, and then he recognized he's a ballsy, outrageous character. He recognized that, if there's any time to walk or talk, it's now. So he did this powerful intervention where he got a Muslim and a Jew up on stage and did this negotiation, and a lot of people were deeply impacted by that. And Amir tells the story of going to Michael Neal, who's a former NLPer and now a three principles based coach, and saying, look, Amir, look, Michael, Tony did this amazing thing. What would you do? And allegedly, Michael had just thought about it for a moment and said, I think I would just give someone a hug. And that was a big moment for Amir. Um, I th- I think again it's important to contextualize this. Like what's the context? In many contexts of life, giving someone a hug or just being present for someone, you know, might be the thing to do. But there are other contexts where someone might pay you to teach them something, or like let's say you go to school. You want a compassionate teacher, but you also want someone who can teach you how to read and write, or guide you to develop and learn particular skills. And if we look at this a bit scientifically, if you look at, for example, the brains of very experienced meditators, people like Matthew Ricard and others, people who have spent tens and thousands of hours doing meditation, uh, their brains fundamentally function differently than most people. But by them having done a lot of insight meditation, a lot of inquiry, a lot of compassion or meta, and to tell people that you already have it. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to cultivate. Seems to me very naive. Like we can acknowledge with people that we have natural health, you know, but that's hardly an argument to not exercise. We could tell people that, look, you have an inborn intelligence and intuitions, but that's hardly an argument not to learn basic math or not to learn basic reading skills. So why would it be an argument in terms of not developing certain psychological capacities? Now, of course, the three principles counter argument would be, yeah, but love, peace, and happiness is what we are. It's not skills to be developed. And there's something to that, but you'll notice that some people at least have these sorts of insights, and they're not necessarily very loving or very compassionate. And there's quite a bit of neuroscience to show that these are particular also capacities that we can develop and that we can cultivate. In terms of Michael Neal, by the way, I want to say something there in terms of wisdom. I remember after the Charlie Hebdo, and I appreciate, I never met Michael Neal. I like his book, The Inside Out Revolution. I think he's done a lot of good stuff. But after the Charlie Hebdo massacre, where people would say, I am Charlie. I don't want to try to say that in French because I'll butcher it. Michael Neal wrote this blog post where he said that he wouldn't say that he was Charlie because he had looked at the Charlie Hebdo archives and kind of discovered that he didn't really like their drawings or what they had to say, that there was too much poking and too little fun in the way they dealt with religions. And I doubt that this is a very wise response. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right, but I highly doubt it, because we are living in a climate at the moment, especially here in Europe, where our freedoms of speech are being restricted legally, and a lot of this is due to a 57 nation Muslim majority country called the IOC, who lobbies for restrictions on freedom of speech in the United Nations. They've been very successful. So legally, in the last 20 plus years, members of the United Nations countries have gotten restricted speech. Culturally, we have this cancel culture thing going on. Uh, and in the last 30 years, 30 plus years, since Salman Rushdie, we've had a climate where people risk their lives by drawing Muhammad, or by criticizing Islam, or by poking fun or criticizing that religion. And then you have the people at Charlie Hebdo who didn't just criticize or make fun of Islam, they made fun of all sorts of stuff, right? But they ultimately got slaughtered for uh, making fun of Islam. And the people who did it were very straight that they did it to avenge the Prophet. So these people died to protect the one principle, freedom of speech, that makes Western civilization possible. It's the only thing that legally stops us from just being savages. You either solve things through dialogue or you do it through violence. That's it. If you take away freedom of speech, you're back to the old, theocratic societies. You're essentially back to Islam, and this is a litmus test moment for us whether Western civilization with freedom of speech as its bedrock is going to win or not. So I found it disappointing that Michael Neal wouldn't do that, and I'm sure he's well intentioned, and he may also have been in a very peaceful, clear place when writing it. And it's not only about Michael Neal, it's also about, I would suspect that in the Three Principles community, you would get more of those sorts of responses. I don't know how much better the NLP world is. The culture in those two worlds are different. The NLPers can come across, and I'm stereotyping now, as a bit more mechanical, a bit more technical, a bit more in their head, a bit more machine-like, a bit more left hemisphere-ish, so to speak. More masculine. And when I say masculine, I'm not referring to gender, but I'm referring to the qualities that you often attribute to masculinity that, of course, a woman also can have. And I remember, in the NLP community, that there's a lot of like overt competition, more hostile humor, more put downs, that sort of stuff. When I first started exploring the Three Principles world, it seemed more feminine in a sense. It seems softer. It seems more loving. It seems more compassionate. It seems more relationship oriented, more right hemisphere ish. In a sense. And at least some of the teachers seem happier, like they have this grandfatherly like energy of just, wanting the best for you. So there is something to that. But what I also discovered is that there seems to be, at least on forums, quite a bit of passive aggressiveness and tribalism and a lot of language of love, that kind of sugarcoats an essential fuck you if you challenge any of the sacred ideas or don't quite share their perspective. So what I'm trying to say is that those communities, for the most part, don't really seem that much more evolved to me than the NLP communities. Oh, there's a final point that Amir Karkodi said, and he said that you can never replace truth with usefulness, and that if you're truthful with people, they will feel it, they will hear it, they will smell it. This is an idea worth challenging. Look at historically what's happened to truth tellers. They often get nailed to the cross so to speak. Um, look at the amount, look at what happens to whistleblowers very often. Look at the amounts of people who get sent to prison for crimes they haven't done. And they've been telling the truth the entire time. And people can't hear it. So this is a myth, and I think it's a kind of naive myth that gets spread often in spiritual communities and the Three Principles community, that we can kind of just feel truth and we can intuit when people are honest and when they're real and stuff like that. If you look at lie detection or the deception detection research, there's a lot of it. I'd highly recommend the book Duped by Timothy Levine as an excellent source on this. It's really clear that we're not good at this. We like to tell ourselves the story that we are, but we're not, right? So, how sincere someone seems to be has virtually nothing to do with how sincere they actually are. I'll say that again because it's hard to it's hard to truly grasp. But how sincere someone comes across tells you virtually nothing about how sincere they actually are. We're not, as a species, very good at this. If you want a less academic book than Duped, I'd highly recommend Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers. It's an excellent book on this particular topic. I think you should read it. Read it, whether you have a Three Principles background or an NLP background or both. If you have it's really fascinating how you see people like Bernie Madoff being able to swindle so many people because he was just so good at coming across as congruent. And then you have people like Amanda Knox, the American student who got convicted for a murder in Italy and was exonerated 4.5 years later. She's in all likelihood innocent, but she doesn't seem that way by her demeanor. She doesn't come across or act the way that we expect an innocent person to act. And this very myth that we can smell truth, we can feel truth, we can intuit when someone is real, is exactly the type of myth that ends up putting innocent people like Amanda Knox behind bars. This is a naive idea that's very often spread in the Three Principles communities. So check out those books. I highly recommend it. If you're from an NLP world, those materials might also give you a kick in the ass in terms of seeing that Paul Ekman's teachings, a lot of the teachings around micro expressions, nonverbal behavior, that we have likely contributed to this mess, a mess of selling to people and thinking that we can intuit and get access to what's really going on inside of people to an extent that we just really can't, based upon nonverbal body language, microexpressions, stuff like that. So anyways, I hope this long little rant was useful and thought-provoking. If you haven't seen them, go check out Amir Karkouti's videos. I thought they were good. I'm trying to offer some complementary perspectives and some disagreements. I think it's healthy to have these sorts of discussions. Okay, till next time. Thanks for listening.